It was a quiet Friday evening, and I found myself seated at one of the most prestigious restaurants in town. As I looked around, I couldn't help but marvel at the sheer elegance of the place. The lighting was soft and golden, casting a warm glow on the pristine white tablecloths that adorned each table. A grand chandelier hung in the center, its crystals shimmering like tiny stars. The soft hum of a piano played in the background, blending seamlessly with the low murmurs of conversation. The patrons were dressed impeccably. Tailored suits, designer dresses, and polished shoes that clicked softly against the marble floors. The air carried a faint scent of fresh roses from the carefully arranged centerpieces, mingled with the aroma of exquisite dishes being prepared in the kitchen. Every detail screamed sophistication and exclusivity. I felt a mix of emotions sitting there. On one hand, I was thrilled to finally experience this level of luxury, a place I'd only ever heard about. On the other, I couldn't shake the feeling of being slightly out of place. My outfit, while decent, didn't carry the same weight as the attire of those around me. I wondered if others could sense my unease, or if it was all in my head. As I sipped my water and waited for my order, I couldn't help but notice how everyone seemed to fit into this world effortlessly. Their laughter soft, their movements graceful. It felt like I was observing an exclusive club where appearances mattered as much as the food. Little did I know that the evening would take a turn I'd never forget. A moment that would challenge everything this atmosphere represented. As I glanced toward the entrance, I noticed a man stepping into the restaurant. He was an older gentleman, probably in his late 40s or early 50s, with kind eyes and a demeanor that radiated humility. His clothes, though clean, were simple and worn. Faded trousers, a plain button-up shirt, and shoes that had clearly seen better days. He carried a small, weathered bag slung over one shoulder and stood for a moment, looking around as if taking in the atmosphere. The man's entrance caused a ripple of reaction among the staff and diners. Whispers flickered from table to table, and a few heads turned to observe him with a mix of curiosity and disapproval. Before he could step further inside, one of the hosts approached him. A young man with a polished uniform and a clipboard in hand. They exchanged a few quiet words, though I couldn't hear them from where I sat. It became clear that the man was being told he couldn't be served. The host gestured politely but firmly toward the door, explaining the restaurant's strict dress code. The man didn't argue, raise his voice, or show any sign of frustration. He simply nodded with a faint smile, his shoulders slightly slumped, and turned to leave. The room seemed to hold its breath as he walked out. Some diners exchanged amused glances, while others looked away, uncomfortable. For reasons I couldn't quite articulate, a pang of sadness hit me. There was something about the way he left, so quietly without complaint, that lingered in my mind. It wasn't anger or defiance, just acceptance, as though he had expected this outcome. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that we hadn't seen the last of him. As the man quietly exited the restaurant, the room seemed to come alive, with murmurs and whispers. At the table nearest to the door, a woman in a sleek black dress leaned toward her companion, her lips curling in a faint smirk. "Did he really think he could walk in here dressed like that?" She whispered loud enough for those around her to hear. Her companion chuckled, shaking his head in agreement. A group at another table, older couples dressed in elegant evening wear, exchanged glances but said nothing. Their silence, paired with subtle headshakes, spoke volumes. Meanwhile, a younger couple seated near the corner barely looked up from their phones, indifferent to the scene that had just unfolded. But not everyone seemed so composed. I noticed a man across the room shift uncomfortably in his chair, his hand tugging at the cuff of his perfectly tailored suit. His eyes followed the older gentleman as he left, a flicker of guilt crossing his face. A waitress standing near the bar hesitated, looking toward the entrance as though she wanted to do something. But protocol, or fear, held her back. Sitting at my table, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. The man hadn't done anything wrong. He didn't cause a scene or demand special treatment, yet his presence had been met with judgment and dismissal. I couldn't ignore the stark contrast between the restaurant's polished facade and the humanity, or lack thereof, that had just played out. The laughter and murmurs around me grew louder, but I couldn't join in. Instead, I stared down at my hands, feeling an unfamiliar mix of shame and unease. Was this really the kind of place I had been so eager to experience? The room suddenly felt colder, and I couldn't stop thinking about the man's quiet dignity. The evening had settled back into its usual rhythm when the entrance doors swung open again. Heads turned instinctively, including mine. To my surprise, it was the same man who had been turned away earlier, but he was almost unrecognizable. He now wore a perfectly tailored suit, midnight blue with subtle pinstripes that caught the light just right. A crisp white shirt peeked out from beneath a silk tie, and polished black shoes completed the transformation. His hair, which had seemed unkempt before, was now neatly combed, and his posture radiated confidence. He no longer carried the air of someone unsure of their place. Instead, he walked in as though he owned the room. The shift in the restaurant's atmosphere was palpable. The same people who had whispered or smirked at his earlier presence now looked at him with admiration, or at least curiosity. The woman in black, who had mocked him earlier, leaned slightly forward in her seat, her eyes following him with interest. The indifferent couple in the corner actually paused their scrolling to glance up, and a few other diners even straightened in their chairs, their smiles polite and welcoming. The host who had turned him away seemed momentarily stunned, stumbling over his words before offering a respectful bow and escorting the man to a prime table near the center of the room. Conversations quieted as he passed, replaced by a ripple of whispers. I sat frozen, watching this remarkable transformation. The man carried himself with a quiet dignity that hadn't wavered even earlier, but now it was amplified by his appearance. It was as though he had peeled back a layer of himself to reveal someone the crowd suddenly deemed worthy. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was about to do something no one would expect. As the man settled into his seat, the restaurant seemed to hold its collective breath. Even the servers, who typically moved with effortless grace and efficiency, paused to steal glances at the figure now commanding the room's attention. It wasn't long before he rose from his chair, gently tapping a spoon against his glass to draw everyone's gaze. "Good evening," he began, his voice calm yet filled with authority. "I apologize for interrupting your meals, but I feel compelled to share something." The room fell silent, forks and glasses momentarily forgotten. "My name is Daniel Harris," he continued, pausing briefly. "Some of you may know me as the founder of this establishment." A collective gasp rippled through the room. I could see the shock on people's faces. The same man who had been turned away earlier was now revealed as the very heart of the place they admired. He smiled gently, letting the moment sink in. "Earlier this evening, I came here dressed differently. I wanted to see how my staff and my patrons treated someone who didn't meet the unspoken standards of appearance. What I witnessed was both enlightening and disheartening." His words cut through the air, leaving a heavy stillness in their wake. "It pains me to see how quickly we judge others based on their clothing or status. This restaurant was meant to be a place where people could experience not just great food but genuine hospitality and kindness." Looking around, he added, "I hope tonight serves as a reminder that worth isn't determined by appearances. Let's strive to see beyond the surface." As he sat down, the room erupted in quiet applause, though many clapped with heads bowed in reflection. I felt a lump in my throat, his words echoing in my mind. It was a lesson none of us would forget. As the applause faded, I sat in silence, processing what had just unfolded. The man's words lingered in the air, heavy yet freeing, forcing each of us to confront an uncomfortable truth about ourselves. I thought back to the whispers, the judgmental glances, and even my own initial reaction. While I hadn't openly criticized him, I'd done something just as harmful. I had stayed silent. I had watched it all happen without saying a word, complicit in my own way. His story struck a chord deep within me. How often do we judge others based on nothing more than their outward appearance? A pair of worn shoes, a simple outfit. How could such trivial things overshadow the essence of a person? I felt ashamed, but at the same time, I was grateful. Grateful for the lesson he'd so gracefully imparted, not with anger or bitterness, but with quiet dignity and a heart full of purpose. Looking around the restaurant, I noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Faces that had once been full of laughter and confidence now looked thoughtful, even remorseful. It wasn't just me who had been moved. I saw the woman in the black dress biting her lip, her once haughty expression replaced with something softer. The indifferent couple put their phones down, perhaps seeing the world with fresh eyes. As I left the restaurant that evening, the glittering chandeliers and polished floors felt less significant than they had before. What stayed with me wasn't the luxury, but the man's powerful reminder to look deeper, to lead with kindness and humility. I resolved to be better, to see people for who they are, not what they wear. That night, I walked away, not just from a meal, but from a moment that had forever changed how I viewed the world. Thank you so much for watching this story. If it touched your heart or made you think, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and share your feelings or lessons you took away from this. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. It really helps us reach more people with meaningful stories like this. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss out on more inspiring content. Lastly, sharing is caring. Send this video to friends or family who might need a reminder about the power of kindness and seeing beyond appearances. Together, we can spread positivity far and wide. Thank you for being part of our journey.